All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for coming to the Commons Live, and welcome. This is an experiment in can we do a live newsletter. So just to give you a little bit of history, the Commons is published by the Public Interest Technology team here at New America, where we work to build the field of public interest technology through evangelization and hands-on projects. So the Commons came out of two separate but related realizations. The first was we had done some research in the field, talking to people working at multiple levels of government all across the country on innovation teams. And we learned that the field is really disconnected, that people have a hard time finding each other, that people have a hard time sharing stories, that people just feel sort of isolated. And so we knew we wanted to do something to remedy that. And then we also knew that this work spreads through evangelization. So that, for example, Chicago might hear, oh, Denver did this really cool project. Why can't we do that in Chicago? Actually, we were just talking in the green room about how this actually just happened. I had a story that just came out in Fast Company on some work that was done in Mobile, Alabama, and like 10 minutes later, somebody in Augusta, Georgia tweeted and said, how come we can't do this in Augusta? So it really does work that way. So we knew that we wanted to lift these stories up so that more people would be inspired. Unfortunately, it turns out that there are not a lot of publications that want to run stories about how the roads got paved on time and everything worked really well, or kind of the nuts and bolts of a 3-year project on creating universal login, for example, doesn't make for great reading. So we were sort of struggling with how to place these stories and where to run them, and we hit on the idea of just launching our own publication. And actually, when we met with the communications team here and said, we're thinking about doing this, and they said, well, isn't there a field journal? And we were like, well, there's not really a field yet, so no, there is not a field journal. So we launched a publication with a list of just 150 people who we knew. In 12 issues, we've grown to 900 subscribers who are extremely engaged. We have a click-through rate that is an open rate that's bananas. So after a year of telling these stories, we wanted to do something special to celebrate our 1-year anniversary. And we love telling stories, but we can't tell all of the stories. So if we truly want to evangelize this work and have it spread, we know that other people also need to become the storytellers. So we wanted to create an event where we shared some of what we have learned about how to tell a story, model different ways to tell stories, and also introduce people to editors to get an understanding of what kind of stories are interesting for editors in this field. So in addition to the people in the room, we have a lot of people who are watching on the live stream. Oh, there's the camera. Hi. And our hope is that by the end of today, you will come away inspired to tell your own stories and with a bit of knowledge around how to do that. So you're going to hear today from master storytellers and editors, and we hope that that will spark some ideas for you. So before we get started, I just want to say thank you to the people who have made the Commons possible. Sarah Hudson, who I think is not here today, and Emma Coleman, who is somewhere, were there from the beginning before this publication had a name or a logo or anything, and were instrumental in getting this launched. And Cecilia Munoz and Vivian Grabard also championed this idea from the beginning. Cecilia is there, Viv is maybe on the live stream, I don't know. So they have been great champions of this, even though I'm sure that when they started this team, they did not think, and we'll also launch a monthly publication, because I didn't. So with that, I am so excited to introduce our MC for the day. Liza Mundy is a former staff writer at the Washington Post, a senior fellow in New America's Better Life Lab, and the best-selling author of several books, including Michelle, a biography of First Lady Michelle Obama. Her most recent New York Times bestseller, Code Girls, tells the story of how more than 10,000 women served as code breakers during World War II. I'll turn it over to Liza.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. One of the many things that I love about New America is the way in which the institution strives to take incredibly important data and research and policy work and get it out into the public domain to make sure that the world can avail themselves and learn from the research. And storytelling is obviously a huge part of that. Storytelling has been my job, for better or worse, for most of my career. And just to give you an example of the many, many places in which stories reside, about 3 or 4 years ago, I was at the National Archives in College Park looking through a sheaf of memos generated by the U.S. Navy right around December 1941, which, as many of you know, was the month that we were propelled into World War II by the surprise attack at Pearl Harbor. And it's hard to believe it now because we live in a city where we have 17 intelligence agencies now. As many of you know, we have intelligence agencies that exist to oversee other intelligence agencies. But we didn't have any of that back in 1941 for the most part. And one of the memos that I ran across as the U.S. Navy was reeling from the attack on Pearl Harbor, which was a massive intelligence failure, and trying to figure out what to do, how to ramp up our intelligence gathering at a time when all of our young men were shipping out to fight all over the world and were so vulnerable in both of the major oceans. And they were trying to figure out how to ramp up their intelligence gathering, and specifically how to quickly ramp up signals intelligence, or what we would now call cyber intelligence. They were trying to figure out where to get smart, resilient people who could become code breakers. And before the war, the Navy had a tiny, tiny cyber intelligence unit, code breaking unit, that was staffed by young men from Harvard and MIT. And these young men were suddenly unavailable because they were shipping out on aircraft carriers and destroyers, convoys across the Atlantic Ocean. And the memo had a single so the memo had been generated every month to say where they were getting just the few code breakers they had had before the war, and now they needed thousands. So on this memo, someone had typed, "New source, women's colleges." So it was this light bulb moment that went on. It was what we would call today innovation, an innovative moment because war had created a sense of urgency, indeed desperation. And it was also a moment of inclusion. It was a moment where the U.S. military decided, well, we don't have the guys we would normally turn to, the white guys we would normally turn to, so let's turn to women to see what they can do. Ultimately, the U.S. military would turn to African-American men to fly planes, the Tuskegee Airmen, Native American men to serve as code talkers. So for me, this was part of what led to a 3 or 4 year project to write about how 10,000 women came to Washington to work as code breakers. It was a story that I enormously enjoyed telling, but it's also a story that's sort of alarmingly relevant to the present day, right? When we debate, why aren't there more women in the tech sector? Why aren't there more women in STEM? And in fact, it's one of a number of books that have come out recently, Hidden Figures being one of the most prominent, showing that this has been a debate that's been with us for decades now, but that in fact women really pioneered and founded the tech sector, much of which was created during World War II. So this is just an example, I think, that going back even further in history, that of how we need these stories. We need to get these stories out, both to sort of inform us about our own history, but also to provide examples and models of the importance of diversity, the importance of inclusion, the importance of innovation, the ways in which we are propelled to innovate. And so I'm obviously a great believer in storytelling, both as an entertainment, a pastime, a way to educate ourselves about history, but a way to remind ourselves about the importance of inclusion, the importance of innovation, and the importance of government in in creating sort of massive policy changes, sometimes during wartime and hopefully more often during times of peace, when the need is still very great to constantly innovate and improve our body politic. So we have a whole event today devoted to a celebration and exploration of storytelling, how to do it, where to find the stories, how to share them. And we're going to start with someone who has what I think is like the greatest job I've ever heard of. Erin Foley is the chief storyteller for the City of Detroit government, which just sounds so awesome to me. Appointed by Mayor Mike Duggan in 2017, he manages a team of writers, photographers, and videographers who document life in the city for a daily website, theneighborhoods.org, as well as programming on city cable. He is a Detroit native and resident, author of the 2015 book, How to Live in Detroit Without Being a Jackass, and editor of the 2017 anthology, The Detroit Neighborhood Guidebook. So welcome, and can't wait to hear about your job.
Okay, I was told by the production people I could sway, because I didn't know that there was going to be a podium or not, so it feels a little weird, but I'm going to do that. So yes, thank you for the introduction, and great to be here with all of you guys. And yes, my job title is Chief Storyteller in the mayor's office at the City of Detroit. And when I first got the job, you know, I got a whole lot of jokes about, oh, you're going to go to the mayor's office and read stories to kids all day. And yeah, I got a lot of that. But how we came up with this job title is I was a journalist in Detroit for about a decade, and I had done 2 books about Detroit. I had done a lot of blogging about Detroit. I had done a lot of commentary, a lot of freelance reporting. I was editor of a magazine for a short point. I helped found a digital news site in Detroit, and it's just been Detroit my whole career. But my career sort of aligns with a lot of major historical changes in Detroit. So when I first came out of college, around that time is when our 2 major automakers, General Motors and Chrysler, filed bankruptcy back in 2009 during the recession. And around that time, the national media was really focused on, you know, the despair and the blight and whatnot going on in Detroit at the time, because we are so tied together with the automotive industry. Then we had a mayor that was convicted of several federal crimes and is now serving a very long time in prison. So that happened. So now not only are we a city whose major industry and identity is flailing, now we're being painted as a very corrupt city and whatnot. And then the city itself, the city government filed for bankruptcy in 2013. And all through this time, you know, if you were to Google Detroit, all you would see is abandoned buildings, abandoned homes, things like that. And not to say that these things don't exist, but it started to blur the line between telling the truth about Detroit and simply exploiting it you know, we reached a point where there was just like a guy with a camera or a woman with a camera, because they were making a documentary all about Detroit's poverty, and it started to look like poverty porn at one point. And so it was very frustrating to me, it was very frustrating to my colleagues, and most importantly, the residents of Detroit, because our story was getting lost among all of the national attention, international attention that was being paid to us. A lot of people were asking, you know, like, what about this business that's been in business for 30, 40 years? What about the residents of Detroit that have stayed around during all these tough times? For as much of the hard times that Detroit has gone through, we started getting a lot of newer residents coming in because the rent started getting lower, the housing prices started getting lower, and so we started getting people from Brooklyn and San Francisco and Austin and all the places that are getting more expensive. And then all of a sudden the media coverage turned to them, where it's just like, oh, look at all the new people coming to Detroit, they're going to save us. And still you had this existing population saying, when are we going to have our story told? This reached the attention of the mayor's office, and our mayor's office is very concerned about a lot of the typical municipal things that a city government does, picking up trash, streetlight repair, waterworks, things of that nature. But we started thinking more about the cultural side of where city government fits in Detroit's landscape. And it's something that the city has not had a chance to really think about because of all the turmoil that has gone on in the past decade or so. But as more and more people started coming to the mayor saying like, hey, you know, the news only comes out to our block if someone's been shot or killed, or the news only comes out to our block if something negative happens, but you've still got A, B, C, D, E, F, G happening here. You know, kids going off to college with full rides, or women that have been, you know, members of this church for 50 years, or this block club that started a couple of urban gardens, or, you know, this community organization that's doing all this good and they're doing it all DIY, or you've got, you know, people taking this abandoned house and turning it into art or something like that. A lot of those stories were just not getting told because it didn't fit in the one realm of you know, extreme poverty, extreme despair, nor did it fit in the other realm of look at all the new shiny people that are coming to Detroit now and giving Detroit a chance. So that's when the mayor approached me about launching this project. And I've spent a lot of time discussing like why this is a public service. Working in city government, being in this role has not been easy because the city government was bankrupt, and so a lot of people are asking like, well, why are we putting money towards this storytelling project and not more firefighters, more police, or more this, more that? While there are certainly resources being, you know, we always have to correct people saying like, we're not bankrupting the fire department just to hire me, right? But we do have to remind people that, yeah, we do have budget, you know, going to all these different departments, but the reason why this is a public service is because we really want to reclaim our narrative for several reasons. One, we want to, make Detroiters feel like that they are a part of the narrative. A lot of Detroiters were saying, especially a lot of black Detroiters, we are a majority minority city, a lot of black Detroiters were saying like, I've lived here in Detroit for 10, 20, 30 years, and yet I don't feel like I'm a part of the city's story. I don't feel like I'm part of the city's comeback. You see a lot of, in our downtown area, we have a lot of skyscrapers going up, we have a lot of new business coming, we have a lot of companies relocating from elsewhere in Metro Detroit to downtown, but you have a lot of people outside of downtown who are just like, well, this doesn't affect me directly, I'm already working here, I already own a house here, but nobody's ever given me any credit for doing so. So we want to, there's a term that we use sometimes called psychological gentrification, where you may not be physically displaced or your rent may not go up at all, but there's this feeling that, like I said earlier, that if you are a homeowner in Detroit or if you're just a longtime resident in Detroit and you don't really see yourself in a headline, or you don't see yourself in a photo, or you don't see yourself in TV coverage, you can start to psychologically feel that you're not a part of the city that you live in. That concern kind of got bounced around the mayor's office a little bit, and that's something I try to address is when I have my photographers, writers, and videographers go out into the city of Detroit, I make it a priority to say, okay, we're gonna go outside of downtown. We're gonna go outside of the places that the newspapers and the TV stations cover and go out and get those types of stories that may slip through the cracks. When I was growing up in Detroit, we had newspapers that had very thick community sections. You know, you had your business section, sports, features, entertainment, all of that, but there was a community section that just covered neighborhoods, and they covered all these small stories about like bowling leagues and things like that. Things that we sort of like don't expect to, we're not used to seeing that in news coverage anymore because what happened? The journalism industry has contracted, a lot of bodies have gotten laid off, newspaper has gotten thinner, everything is digital first. It's like, you know, whoever is first out with a headline gets the most eyes and the clicks or whatever. But along the way, you know, there's a whole generation of Detroit readers who, when I mention On Detroit, which is the name of the community section that used to be in the Detroit News, they're just like, what? We didn't even have a newspaper subscription growing up, right? So like there's a whole contingent of people who do not know what community reporting looks like, but there's also a community of people in Detroit who remember that and still want to be acknowledged in that sort of way. So that's where we try to fit in, really. We're not trying to supplant or replace a newsroom, but my department and the larger department that we work in, we try to think more like a newsroom where it's like, okay, where are some of the interesting things? Where can we gather some of these stories that would make people want to read this and be a part of it? The other part of this is making it look interesting. I work in the department that produces public access television. And if you know anything about public access television, it tends to be very, you know, between two ferns-ish, where it's like, And that's not to say that it's not worthwhile programming. I mean, one thing I found out in the 2 years that I've been in this role is that people will watch that, because we have a lot of senior citizens especially that watch our channels nonstop. We have out of our 4 channels, our most watched one is the one with the city council meetings, water board meetings, and things like that. But knowing that we have this in our stable, we're like, okay, we have a bunch of people that create video content, and we have the up-to-date equipment. Why don't we take our video production quality up to a higher level and really show what Detroit is made of? So our team, my team, started doing short documentaries, like 3 to 7 minute long things. Then we started moving into a little bit longer documentaries. We've got a 22-minute one. We've got a 30-minute one. And the reason why we do this is because not only did we have the capability to do it, but we saw that a lot of stories were best told through video. And before, a lot of the video, the sort of our lifestyle programming, I guess, that was outside of the city council meetings was just kind of like plop the camera on a tripod and do a quick interview, and that would be it. But I said, okay, well, why don't we try something where we just offer something a little bit more stylized, something that you would see like on an actual cable channel, or like on a History Channel or a Nat Geo or something like that. And we started moving in that direction, and it started to pay off. Not only are we thinking smarter about how we present this content, we have to think about the digital side. It's like, okay, will it get more views on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or this? It works if you upload it directly to Facebook, by the way. But not only that, but like people started responding to it. They said, we didn't know the city government of Detroit was capable of producing video like this. We didn't know that these stories existed because they're seeing these stories captured in a different way. I will say that we won an Emmy last year for one of the videos that we did. A local Emmy, not like a, but I always have to shout out Jeremy Brockman who won that, but he's on my team. But no, this is how we're thinking now. We're thinking more like a newsroom. And so we entered into the podcasting realm this year. We built a podcast studio inside of City Hall. I'm not sure if we're the first city government, but nobody else has claimed it, so we might be. And we just, we're not quite there yet. The studio's still new, and we had this recording booth and with a little bit of sound padding in it, and I ordered some more sound padding, which was a bear to do through, if you've worked in city government, there's a lot of bureaucracy involved in trying to order the smallest thing. But we got some sound padding, we got some microphones and some stools that were around the office, and we just started, bringing people in. We brought our planning department in, and our planners had an issue in terms of communicating with residents. Our planners speak a lot of the language of planners. It's a lot of academic terminology, it's a lot of inside baseball, and it was going over horribly with the residents because they hear things like bike lanes, greenways, all of these planning terms, and all they hear is gentrification, 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 gentrification. No matter, even if it is for the residents' benefits. One of the things that we struggle with messaging in Detroit right now is bike lanes, because in other cities, bike lanes tend to be, not in every city, but they do tend to be a signifier of gentrification in other cities. But in Detroit, the majority of the people who use bikes tend to be low income, people of color, and probably the least likely to gentrify a neighborhood. So we're adding bike lanes for their protection and safety. But a lot of people see it as, oh, you're just putting it in because the new residents are coming in. No, we're doing it because this is literally how 75% of bike riders in Detroit get to and from grocery store, work, and things like that. But the planning department was having a difficult issue conveying that to residents. So I said, okay, let's try podcasting with them where they can be relaxed, out of the environment of their office, out of the environment of their community meetings, and we'll just make it a conversation amongst ourselves. And it worked. A lot of people started listening to the planning department's podcast, and they say like, oh, I get it now. You're explaining it in layman's terms. You're explaining it in a lot more comfortable environment. This to us adds to our storytelling platform because, like I said, we're trying to connect city government with residents in a different way in which people can see what Detroit is made of, experience what Detroit is made of, and learn something new about the city that they lived in. We did a storytelling pop-up at a boutique on the west side of Detroit, and if you've ever been to Detroit, it's a very large city. It's 143 square miles. It takes 40 minutes to drive from one end of 8 Mile Road, the northern border of the city, to the end, and you'll still be in Detroit. I was literally in, I can't remember the name of the suburb here, but I was visiting a friend of mine at her job from my Airbnb in DC to a different city in Maryland. It was only like a 20-minute drive, and I was thinking, like, you can drive 20 minutes from point A in Detroit and still be there, and that's something I have to get used to when I go to different cities. But we did the storytelling pop-up on the west side, and we were thinking like only people from the west side are going to come to this. We had an audio setup and a photo booth, and we just did it like NPR Story Corps, where we asked people to just come to the mic and tell your story, no matter how mundane it is. We just want to hear from Detroiters. We'll capture your audio, and then we'll put it out on our accounts. We had people from the east side of Detroit come over to this west side shop, and they were like, we didn't know these shops existed. We didn't know this stretch of business that we were on was here. It's been, like, we had one woman say, like, we haven't been on this side of town in so long. Now we're going to come over here and check these things out. And that to us was a public service, because we're introducing small business. We're introducing, we're sort of helping the economy here and spreading it from one end of the city to the other. The biggest accomplishment, in my opinion, is something that we most recently pulled off when it comes to how we cover and how we find these types of stories. Detroit is a majority minority city, but if you look at news coverage, it tends to lean very, very white. Especially when we talk about small business and entrepreneurship in the city. I made it a point to not only include as many Black-owned businesses and Black community leaders and Black residents as possible, and not just the higher-ups and the executives, but we try to find the everyday people. These are the people that do not have a name, do not have a title. These are your neighbors. These are the people that you just see every day. The store clerks, we literally interview store clerks and people at the front desk and whatnot. We try to elevate them on the same level as the executives and all the other bigwigs in town. But not only that, we have a growing Bangladeshi population. We have a huge Latino population. We have a growing West Indian and Caribbean population, a sizable Jewish population. We're mostly a Christian city, but we do have a Jewish population, and Arab American, and an LGBT population, which is heavy on everyone's mind because it's Pride Month, right? So last year, we did a series of stories where we just interviewed ordinary LGBT residents of the city of Detroit and asked them, why did you choose Detroit as a place to live? What's it like being gay or lesbian in Detroit? What's it like being trans in Detroit? We tried to do this beyond Pride Month. We consistently interview trans residents, lesbian residents, gay residents all year round, because to me, I don't believe you should wait until June to do it, but we decided to ramp it up in June anyway. And so we just did this whole series of LGBT-related stories last June. And then this June, when we came back around, we started putting the call out on social media, like, hey, like, we're ready to do this again. If you want to talk to us, we'll podcast you, we'll photograph you, whatever. One lesbian couple who responded to our call for stories or whatever said, we read your series last year, and we moved from the suburbs of Detroit to the west side of Detroit in a neighborhood called Bagley, which is 7 Mile in Livernois. And they said, the reason why we moved to Detroit was because we read your series last year, and we did not know that there were this many lesbian couples living in the city. So now we feel like we have a home in Detroit because we have this community that we can network with. And that to me was a point of pride, and it was especially a point of pride for the writer who led the series last year. It was a point of pride for me because that was the one thing that I wanted to accomplish with the storytelling platform, was inspire someone to either move to Detroit or start a business in Detroit because of something that we've done. So when I get the critics saying, like, well, why is the city doing this? Why is the city doing storytelling and not firefighting? We still are doing firefighting, but we get this question a lot because we're, like I said earlier, we're trying to reclaim our narrative, and we're trying to show the full story of Detroit and what is possible when you make your home in Detroit, when you start your business in Detroit, but also, projecting to the outside world that there's life in the city. There is multicultural life in the city. There is many ways of living in Detroit that's not just living in a high-rise downtown. as people would tend to think. So that's pretty much how we do it. Going forward, I'm actually leaving the city of Detroit in a couple of months and hopefully coming back, but I'm leaving to do a fellowship. The reason I'm doing this fellowship is because I really want to model what I'm doing. I'm taking time off to really, I guess, patent or just, write the blueprint, because I've done a lot of this stuff, making it up as I go along. But it has been replicated in other cities along the way. The city of Denver hired a chief storyteller, and I dialogued with Rowena there last year when she was on her way to doing it. And they're sort of replicating the Humans of New York model, where they're doing, photo galleries of people of Denver and projecting outward to the city of Denver, what Denver looks like. The city of Atlanta, hired a chief content officer, not the same job title, but when they put the press release out there that they were doing a chief content officer role, they wrote in the press release, and I was so happy they did. They were just like, well, we're patterning this after the city of Detroit, which hired a chief storyteller. I was just like, yeah, we did that. So, but and his role, Keith's role, is going to be more of a marketing role. So there's many different ways of going about this. I try to explain to people that I'm not a communications officer. I'm not putting out press releases, although we do from time to time, if it's something that we think is interesting enough for our purposes, try to communicate some city initiatives that can directly benefit a resident. Not every resident is going to respond to an RFP for blank piece of land to build new condos. I'm not going to write that press release. But if there's something our Parks and Recs department needs a little bit of help getting out there, as far as there's a thing that happens every year, we do camping, outdoor camping through the Parks and Recs department. And that's not a thing a lot of residents know about. Like, it's been going on for years, and I was a kid in Detroit, and I was like, we never went camping. I didn't know you could go camping in Detroit, but we want to bring more attention to that. Then then I kind of slip into a little bit of a more communications type of role. But I have to remind people that, I'm not here to parrot the mayor's initiatives. I'm not here to parrot the city's initiatives. I'm here as a mayoral appointee, but doing this from the more cultural aspect of it. My role is to show Detroiters what Detroit is made of, and also show people who are watching Detroit, because a lot of people are watching Detroit, like, who lives here, what's possible here, what's capable of being done here. To me, it's a public service. It's a new thing that we're still playing with and experimenting with, but now it fits in with our arts and culture initiative, which was literally just restarted last month after about a decade-long absence. So our city is really, really moving forward in the direction of not just thinking about, like I said earlier, the municipal part of things and the physical and the infrastructure, but like, where do we fit in culturally? And when I talk to other cities about this, I always say, like, okay, what is the story that you wish other people knew about your city, but you don't know, but what is the city that you wish other people knew about your city that you want to tell? And this is the way that you can do it. You can do it through video. You can do it through podcasting. You can do it through social. You can do it by posting something every day. We're looking at doing print. We do a newsletter that I'm not totally in love with, because it comes out quarterly and it's very expensive to our budget. And I'm just like, okay, if we're going to be spending this much money, can it at least like have the look and feel of a magazine and not a newsletter? But that's something I did discuss with the other department with. But this is how we're starting to think now. We're starting to think like a newsroom. We're starting to think more about culture. We're starting to think about the social part of it, and where do we all fit in, because at the end of the day, this is our narrative and what we want people to know about us. Not necessarily what we want people to think about us, but what we want people to know about us. So that's all I've got to say on that. So thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much, Aaron. As one who remembers the days of community newspapers and community sections of newspapers, I well remember how important those sections were, and sometimes are, the ones that remain, for creating a sense of community identity and making and helping people to feel represented in the pages of the newspaper. And it's great to hear how your shop has generated all of these platforms and turned to all these different ways of storytelling coming out of your one office. It's actually incredible to hear. And now we're going to have a panel talking about getting these stories out into existing publications, often digital publications, but not just exclusively. And so we have a wonderful panel. I think you all can come up as I introduce you. Meredith Drossback is going to be the moderator of this panel. Meredith is a physical scientist with expertise in observational astrophysics and extensive science policy experience in Washington, D.C. Prior to joining Sciline, where she's the associate director, Meredith served for 5 years at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, most recently as its acting lead for science. There she worked with the public and private sectors to expand opportunities and improve learning outcomes in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM, education, as well as to support and strengthen the research and development enterprise in space science, materials science, and forensic science. So welcome, Meredith. She'll be moderating. And we have Suzanne Labar, who is a senior editor at Fast Company and the editor of Fast Company's Company Design. Previously, she was the online content director of Popular Science. She has written for the New York Times, the New York Observer, Newsday, ID, Metropolis, and The Offspring. Welcome. Thank you so much. Kate Querum is a staff correspondent for Route 50, where she covers innovative and interesting government programs at the state and local level. She previously covered local government at several daily newspapers. Most recently, the News and Record in Greensboro, North Carolina. She holds a master's degree in journalism from the University of Maryland. Welcome. Jenny Rogers is deputy editor of the Washington Post Freelance Network. Previously, she worked as an editor in the Post's Sunday Outlook section and as assisting managing editor of Washington City Paper, which is also my alma mater, and as a reporter for the Washington Examiner and TBD.com. She holds a master's degree in journalism from the University of Missouri and a bachelor's in art from Rhodes College.
Thank you all so much for having us. If you'll indulge me for just a second, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what I do and where I'm coming from before we dive into talking to these amazing journalists. As was mentioned, I'm one of the associate directors at Sciline. We are a service hosted by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and our entire mission is to help journalists get connected to the scientific and technical expertise and experts that they need to get their stories right. So whether that is connecting them to a source for a specific story they're working on, or bringing a group of journalists together for a deep dive on a topic like genomics, or a couple of days talking about oil and gas development and how that affects environmental health in your community. We're working with journalists from a wide range of institutions, whether it's local papers in Victoria, Texas, and Savannah, Georgia, or national papers, whether it's radio, television, and specialty reporters. I get to see a wide range of what people are writing about, and it's so amazing, the work that's going on out there. So as a former scientist and a science policy advisor, bringing that together with these journalists is really exciting for me today. So I wanted to give each of you guys an opportunity to kick it off and tell us a little bit about your role. What is it that you do? Do you want to start?
Mm-hmm. Jenny from the Washington Post, and right now I'm editing and commissioning freelance pieces across the newsroom, and previously was doing the same, but just in sort of the ideas world.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I do.
Suzanne from Fast Company. I'm the design editor, so we cover the intersection of business design and technology, and mostly just work with staff writers, but some freelancers, including Hannah.
I'm Kate. I'm from Route 50. We're an online publication. We're part of Atlantic Media, and we cover innovations at the state and local level. So I don't have a subject matter beat that I focus on. I pretty much just cover interesting and innovative programs and initiatives at the state and local level.
What kinds of stories do each of you like to write?
Well, I don't write anymore, but the stories I like to edit are good ones. And, and that sounds stupid, but that's really what they all have in common.
What makes it good?
Well, when Hannah asked me to be on this panel, I was like, well, I don't edit stories in that area. And she's like, yes, you do. You edited this story and this story. And then I started realizing I edit all kinds of stories in government. I just don't think of them as government stories. But something that has a news peg, something that would surprise a general audience. I like stories where the writer is able to bring in some unique kind of knowledge, something, whether that's a first-person piece or they're talking about something they actually experienced or did in work. I like that little personal touch in a story, which probably isn't appropriate for all reporting, but so something that'll make a reader say like, oh, that's cool.
Suzanne, how about you?
So I agree. For my publication, everything has to have an innovation angle. So that's the most important thing that we look for. Beyond that, oh, and I should also say I also don't write anymore, like at all. Beyond that, we're also looking for a little bit of tension in a story. It's not enough to just say like, oh, here's this innovative new app. Isn't it great? We want to know what the story is behind that. What's the tension that, prompted people to want to develop this app? There has to be some meat to the story. And then we also like stories that have good characters. A really boring, app developer probably is not going to get a 3,000-word story. We want a diverse cast of people. We want interesting backgrounds, and yeah, that's about it.
I do still write. We cover, so Route 50, our audience is typically people who work in state and local government, which drives some of our coverage. It helps if the innovation or the program is something that can be replicated, but that's not a necessity. I personally I tend to gravitate toward the technology stories that affect social services and public programs. And it's always really good if there's a human angle, if you can point to an individual who lives in the city or in the community who's been personally affected by the development, which is difficult to do at the national level, but it's wonderful when it happens.
I want to actually turn to the audience for a moment, and I know we won't be able to capture anything from the folks on the live stream, but what kinds of stories do you all like to read? Does anybody read here? Yeah.
Architecture, arts, culture, technology, and science of the contemporary and developed human beings.
Wow. Up in the back. Stories you can relate to. Yeah.
I like stories that have an element that might appear mundane at first, but where there's a little surprise hiding in there.
So you were saying an element that might appear mundane, but actually there's something hidden underneath that's not mundane. I saw a hand.
I was going to say, sort of like 99% invisible, when you have something that might point out some kind of inequity that you don't have visibility to. So, like something you want to relate to, but you haven't related to before is quite interesting.
Yeah, so a story that points out something you might not have seen, right? And you might not have noticed before, but now that you've heard, sometimes it's all you see, right? So I want to turn back to you guys and ask you guys to tell us about a particular story that you may have read or heard that really stuck with you. Preferably about a public interest technology endeavor, perhaps. But a story that stuck with you and why it stuck with you. What was it about it that made it stick?
In the past, I think this was 2 months ago, I did a story about a public-private partnership between Allegheny County in Pennsylvania and a tech company called 412 Food Rescue. And 412 Food Rescue's mission is to eliminate food waste. So much of the food that we don't eat just gets thrown away and ends up in landfills. And so one of the things that they did is developed an app. It's called Food Rescue Hero. And they partner with grocery stores who alert them via the app when they're getting rid of what they called imperfect produce. So it's all that food that's still edible, but it's not pretty enough, basically, to go in the store, like the slightly bruised apple. And when the notification comes in on the app, the organization alerts a volunteer driver who will then take it to either a nonprofit or, in this case, the county housing authority to pass out to residents who are living there. And that one kind of stuck with me because I feel like it's the perfect marriage of technology and government doing, like working together and doing things well. But it's just such a basic thing. Like food insecurity is just, it's a huge problem, but just not knowing where your meal is coming from and thinking about what you're going to eat every day is just such a basic human thing. And it's such a tangible problem for technology to be solving that one really stuck with me.
It sounds like a problem that's extremely widely applicable,
Yeah,
sadly,
exactly.
that there's food insecurity everywhere you look. How about you guys, any stories?
Do y'all remember when, I think this was last year, when Domino's did that promotion where they were offering to pave cities' potholes?
Yes, I do.
Yes. It's very controversial. There was like just a straight up news story about it on the Post, and it was blowing up, and there was a lot of traffic, and there was clearly like a lot of interest in this, and there were a lot of people tweeting about like that this was some kind of like sort of dystopia where we're like relying on corporations to fill these like basic civic functions. And I just thought maybe we should hear from someone who took Domino's up on this. And I called up the city manager in Milford, Delaware, and asked him if he would write about it. And he wrote a very boring seeming piece that was actually very interesting about how when you're a city manager, you have this like rinky-dink budget to do the basic functions of your city, and that you can get grants to do the more like exciting things, but no one's going to give you a grant to like pave your potholes. So like getting $5,000 from Domino's was like a huge thing for this like pretty small town in Delaware. And like he wrote a little, he was able to talk about it's a low-tax state, and there's like a very, very high expectation of good services there, and no inclination to raise taxes. So it puts the city workers at like a very difficult position. They can never raise taxes, but they have to like provide a beautiful city. So he kind of felt like some of the critiques of the program were, he didn't come out and say this, but it was, we're a little immature, and just people who don't know how a city is run and how difficult it is to finance these like little things. And I liked it because like my father-in-law is from New Jersey and is always complaining about like the taxes, and I'm like, and the waste, and it's like, well, here's this guy who's writing about how he like makes his employees like turn the lights off like religiously because he's so concerned about wasting 1 cent of taxpayer money. So that was a story that like kind of, like he was not a dynamic man, but he had like something unusual to tell people, and I think it flipped a lot of people's expectations. And it did really good traffic.
Very important. So a story that has really stuck with me is actually the one that Hannah mentioned earlier today about Mobile, Alabama. The city basically figured out how to reduce blighted properties in the city by 45%. It was just a fascinating story about how this all came together. You basically had this very Republican mayor who, he's friends with Jeff Sessions, partner up with this sort of ragtag team of city workers, these progressive city workers, and come up with a bunch of different solutions to reduce blighted properties, starting with just figuring out how to count the blighted properties in Mobile. And to do that, they went to Instagram. Very easy solution, but clever because like nobody else had thought of that. And then it finally ended up with them actually changing state law in order to make it so that the city could seize these blighted properties and fix them up and then potentially sell them. And what I really loved about that story, I mean, it was beautifully written, but also, it had a very diverse cast of characters. It spoke to a larger problem, which, blight is very much a symbol of inequality in American cities and growing inequality. And then the solution was just really clever. It was just a series of very clever moves that, again, nobody had thought of before. So that really hit on all cylinders for me.
I want to turn now to sort of how you do your jobs and how do you find story ideas? Particularly for folks in the room, how might someone with an idea approach you as an editor or you as a reporter? And perhaps equally as importantly, what should they not do?
I have a lot to say about this. Well, I'll start with sort of generally how we find story ideas. I'd say about a third of our stories come from the writers just having sources and sort of generating their own leads. A third probably come in from PR pitches and pitches from designers and stuff like that. And then the other third are me and the other design editor at Fast Company sort of getting together and deciding, okay, this is the narrative that we want to tell this year or this quarter or whatever, and then kind of sicking our writers on that. So like past couple years, the big narrative for us in the sort of design technology sector has been privacy. Like we are obsessed with it. We can't write enough about it. But that's sort of generally how we find our ideas. And then in terms of actually pitching us, I mean, do you want me to give like specific pitch guidelines? Just be extremely concise, really, really, really concise, like one paragraph if you're pitching us or anyone. I'm sure, as you know, the media industry has gone from this to this. Our staffs are shrinking constantly, and we get, 1 million emails a day and ignore 99% of them. So really good subject line, really short pitch. Make sure there's like a really compelling news peg in there, compelling characters if you can get them in a very short space. And for us, something that is always helpful is also imagery, art. If you don't have art with you, like, can you promise some? Can we see some images of this thing that you're pitching us on? Is there video, any other media that can sort of help this story sing? Will all capture my attention and the writer's attention a lot more than, something that doesn't have that. Maybe the others can go and then we can talk about what not to do.
Wait, this is what to do?
Yes.
Okay. Well, at the Post and like a lot of places like the Atlantic or the Times, if you're pitching like ideas or opinion pieces, there's usually some public email address out there, and you just email it. That's it. I mean, it's not like that hard. And I cannot even believe, like, I see such good Twitter threads on the news, like on like the hottest, like most breaking news thing, and there's like a 20 tweet thread, and I was like, why didn't you just write this down and email it to me? Now everyone's seen it, but so, I still get a lot of stories that way, just asking people, will you just write up your Twitter thread with some links? And you have a 1,000-word piece in the Post. That happened so many times.
So is your approach the same with a great subject line that's really catches you and a really short paragraph? Is that what you think somebody should send to the Post?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good advice.
Yeah. How about as a reporter?
Yeah, so it's a little different. Finding stories is always the hardest part of a reporting job, but it's especially, like I come from a newspaper background, so traditionally, like in every other job I've ever had, I'm working a traditional beat where you have a handful or a dozen of really good sources who sort of feed you story ideas, in addition to sort of trolling for them. And so when I started here, I tried to get advice on how to find like the local government stories on a national level, and the only advice I got was to like Google News certain keywords, which I tried for like 6 months and it was awful and it didn't work for me at all. So there's still I still do some like poking around on local government websites, and I find some stories that way, and then I get some from press releases, but what I don't get is people who are in charge of these programs sort of proactively reaching out to me to suggest cool things. And that's, when I was working for newspapers, like I don't know if this is just endemic to people who work in government, especially at maybe not so much at the federal level, but at state and local, there's like this hesitance to sort of talk about your accomplishments and the cool things that you're doing. And even sometimes if I find out about one and I call someone who's in charge of it, the first reaction a lot of times is like, oh, that's not interesting. And like, it is, I promise it is. Like, I promise people are interested. So my advice to pitch would be first to go ahead and do it, because I promise you're doing something that I and other people would find interesting. And just include, I know you guys want it really short because you get pitches all the time. I like more detail. Not like, don't write the story for me, but a little bit of background is nice because I'm not embedded in those communities, so I don't always have the context right off the bat. But I'm like very open to the pitches, like send the pitches.
So you as a reporter would take one of those pitches and something you found really compelling, and you would go out and report that
Yes.
story and write it. But for you guys as editors, if people send an idea in, is that something you would turn around and ask them to write, or would you assign it to one of your reporters to report and put together?
Well, if it was a writer pitching us an idea, we would never give it
Give
to a staffer, because that'd be like stealing.
But if it was somebody from government, somebody who's worked on a really cool project.
So they're basically sending like a tip. Yeah, I would turn it over to probably the appropriate editor to assign to a staffer.
Okay.
But if it caught my attention, yeah.
So what should folks not do?
Seem to have a lot of enthusiasm for this topic.
Well, so I come from San Francisco, Silicon Valley. I get a lot of pitches from that world. So maybe in the government world, people are not as thirsty. But I think the first rule is like don't harass editors and writers. I mean, that should be obvious, but trust me, it's not. If a writer or editor doesn't respond right away or respond at all, then they're probably passing on an idea. We don't have endless resources to respond to every single email, and if we did, all we would do all day is respond to email. If we do respond and say it's a pass, better to not follow up and ask why, because again, we would literally do that all day if we were answering all those emails. I have more, but I can stop there.
I kind of want to hear it though.
Okay. Well, back to this is very specific to my publication, but back to the thing about art and images. We are a very visual publication, especially the design coverage. And don't send bad pictures. I know it sounds like petty and whatever, but we'll probably pass on an idea if the photos are like really blurry and amateurish. It's better to say we could do a photo shoot at our, whatever, rather than send a bad picture that's just going to make us pass immediately. Yeah.
So that first impression is critically
It
important.
really, I know, and I hate saying that because I wish that we were not that superficial, but again, just like the resource issue, we just don't have enough time to really dig into everything. And if I see an amazing visual, like that's got me. And if you have a good pitch to go along with it, then I'm probably sold. If I see a bad image, I'm probably going to pass without even reading the pitch.
That's so interesting. I think this just goes to show that you should try and know a little bit about the publication you pitch, because that's clearly very important at your place. At our place, I would never expect a freelancer to send art unless it was somehow relevant to the piece. I mean, like if the piece was about art, but otherwise, I probably wouldn't even open the attachment. So I think there's like a sense of you should know a little bit about what the place is looking for. A thing I cannot believe writers do is they'll sit on a story, on a news peg story for like days before pitching.
I don't, no words.
Like
Don't wait.
It's called the news. Like just don't do that ever. And then there's all kinds of idiosyncratic, odd things. The badgering is real. We've passed on this, thanks. I feel so strongly about this piece, I must ask you to reconsider. Okay, pass again. But yeah, I mean, but really just, it's like a bad pitch is not the end of the world. It's much better to send a million pitches, because even if they're not perfect, you might get an editor who thinks like, oh, there's a kernel there, there's like something good there, and always better to pitch than not once.
I think that's true for if you're pitching an idea to a reporter. It also is good to just even slightly research what the reporter covers. Like I cover state and local government. Like this is a very broad area that I cover, and I still get just I'm somehow on some list for like press releases about butter, like French butter. I don't know how I got on this list. They do have beautiful art though. Yeah. So just a tiny bit of research.
I think just to add to that, I also think that's a great point, and one of the things that frustrates me a lot is, and again, this comes largely from PR people in Silicon Valley and it may not apply here, but I'll get pitched a lot on the world's most innovative X. This has never been done before, and then like all I have to do is Google and see it's been done a million times before. But like that pitch, that just wasted my time and the person's time, right? Because they put all this effort into basically lying. So, be straight up about what the story is, and I think your chances of getting a story written are a lot higher.
Jenny, you mentioned knowing a little bit about the publication to which you're pitching. So I actually wanted to ask you, Kate, because you have worked at local newspapers and local publications. Is there anything different about what the Greensboro News and Record would cover versus what the Washington Post would cover in terms of how people should be thinking about pitching to a local versus national versus specialty publication?
I don't know that the coverage is that different, except the Post is obviously doing it on a much larger scale. And when you drill down to local government issues, and this is a blanket statement that isn't true all the time, but if there's something specific happening in a community that's of national interest, you have national media who kind of parachute in and then parachute back out. So they're not there for the aftermath, and they don't necessarily know the community as well. But I don't know that there's that much of a difference in terms of like the bedrock principles of covering those types of issues. In terms of pitching, I'm sure it's just that if you're covering a beat at a local paper, like I'm going to write about things that the Post is never going to cover, like a county commissioner meeting, Okay. Yeah, that's true. But those stories they matter to the people who live in those communities, so that's kind of why they get covered.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
Another theme that came up, a couple of you talked about sources. Are there particular ways that folks in the room or watching, they might have some great insider knowledge into a story you're working on, but that isn't necessarily about their own work? And so what kind of attributes do you look for in a good source? How can someone sort of become a good source for you, even if it's not to necessarily pitch their own work?
I think enthusiasm is really important for the subject matter. I also think it helps a lot if you can not dumb it down, but if you're talking, especially with tech and innovation subjects, they can be very complicated. Mm-hmm. And so if you can explain it in a way that makes it accessible, that makes my job much easier, because that ultimately is my job, to explain it in a way that people can understand.
Right. So things like not using jargon.
Right.
And things like.
Or if you're going to use jargon, don't get mad if I stop you and say, explain it to me like I'm 5.
Right.
Definitely agree with that last point. For us also, just diversity. We, would love to have more women and people of color talking to us. The design industry tends to be really white and male dominated, and we would love to hear more from other people and, just have a wider range of voices that we're quoting in our stories. And yeah, that's probably the most important thing for us.
We've got just a couple more minutes, but I have one more question to ask of you all. Sometimes the work to improve government services can be very process-driven and therefore can be, some might say, dry. What advice do you have for ways to frame some of these stories that on the surface might seem dry but have really direct application to people's lives?
NewsPeg is like the number one, far and away. Like, just watch the news really closely. And like Hannah wrote a very successful post for me about when Hawaii had that false alarm. Yes, thank you. So, and it was just a great, there was a lot of interest in that incident, and it was a good illustration of government technology being bad. So it was perfect, you know, because if she'd pitched me a story 2 weeks before that was just about like government technology, blah, blah, blah. So it was just like sharp on her part to be like watching the news and figuring out where can I like plug in here and add my expertise and my stories. And I'm also a big fan of anecdotes.
I think making stories accessible, I think one of you mentioned that was a key factor in what you read. Hannah also did a story for us about the treasurer of St. Louis who managed to pay for college for low-income children she basically tweaked the way that things worked in the city and funneled parking meter money to this college program, which everybody hates getting parking tickets. That's something we can all relate to. Whereas if it had just been a story about like funding college for low-income students, I don't know that people would have really clicked on that story or read it as extensively as they read this one. Because they were like, oh, okay, I know what it's like to be really angry about getting a parking ticket, and here it's actually going to a good cause. So it was a feel-good story that a lot of people could relate to.
I've gotten parking tickets lately, so I'm just trying not to like seethe in the moment. I think focusing on the why of whatever program or innovation that you're talking about can be really effective. They're not all as high profile as like the Hawaii incident, but the need for a better alert system or even a program like To Feed the Hungry or to help victims of sexual violence, anything like that, it all starts from one person or one event or some city worker or government official realizing that it's a problem in the community. And I think that if you can start from that compelling place, anything that seems mundane or sort of clogged in the cogs of government can be really compelling.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you all so much for that illuminating look at how to pitch your idea, how to get published. That was really incredibly helpful. And we're going to move on now to a presentation that will include both remarks and video. We welcome Noelle Hidalgo, who is the Executive Director of Beta NYC, a driving force to improve New York City's use of technology and share its data. Beta NYC runs the New York City Civic Innovation Lab/Fellows Program in partnership with the Manhattan Borough President Gail A. Brewer and curates the NYC School of Data Community Conference. Noelle was a Technology and Democracy Fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation, served as an inaugural member of Code for America's National Advisory Council, and is a former fellow and currently an affiliate at Data and Society Research Institution. Thanks.
Sweet. Hello, everybody. I need to set a timer, right? Because I have roughly 5 minutes. No, something like that. Okay. 5:22. Hi, how are you? Good? Great. Thanks for letting me come here to DC for the day. This lovely weather has been really entertaining to bike around on your amazing transportation, multimodal transportation systems. Thanks. As you probably know, our democracy at many different levels has been under threat, whether it's from cyber attacks to fake news. And one thing that I see that is continuously underfunded and under-resourced are the hyper-local versions of government. Here you call them ANCs, just to give you a little bit of, what are the ANC stands for? Area Neighborhood Council? Advisory, right, because they really don't have power, right? They sit there as a series of concerned citizens and they're giving some type of advice. And in New York City, we have something similar, and they're called community boards. And you're going to watch a little video about how these advisory forms of government, we're essentially helping improve them. And so for the last 5 years, we've been really fortunate to take 49 CUNY undergraduate students, which are City University of New York, so they're public education students who have come from literally around the world, that are primarily first-generation New Yorkers or first-generation college attendees, and to give them a unique experience to see what it's like to be in government. So we've taken, and you will hear a story from Ramesh, who's a former Marine and a currently CUNY student, who essentially came to us one year through this CUNY Service Corps program, and then was thinking, hey, you know, I'm just gonna volunteer, do this work study type of thing, get paid a little bit here and there, and we helped redirect his life to really be thinking about how that he could be using technology, data, and design into his studies. And then we've continued to hire him so that way we can employ him because he's such an amazing individual, and have helped set up a program that takes CUNY undergraduate students that are paid for by CUNY, and then we have this pipeline where we train them and we have them become little tiny data analysts. And then once they have successfully completed that course, we then try to find them jobs inside of either government or with us, or have them move on to other fellowships. And so this past year, we've had 12 CUNY fellows from 5 CUNY colleges, originating from Guyana, Ghana, China, Bangladesh, Dominican Republic, Guatemala, and Haiti. This year's particular class, you can go online to beta.nyc and take a look at all the classes that we offer for free to the general public to teach people how to use open data and these government-built websites that have no manuals. And we've added 2 different modules this year to teach our fellows how to use R and ArcGIS, which are instrumental tools when you're wanting to become a data analyst. So our students get paid to learn how to become data nerds. And then also this year, like as we have kind of worked through this program over the last 5 years, what we've realized is that we need to have, we're essentially tech support. And what we're doing for these community advisory groups is that we're doing a higher level tech support that they've ever had access to. And so we needed to build this into a pipeline. So we now do data assistance requests, DARs. We also do LARs, which is legislative assistance requests, PARs, which are policy assistance requests, and Rs, which are application assistance requests. But we've essentially created a pipeline so that way these advisory groups, New York City community boards, as well as city council members, and then our county executives, which New York City has 5 of them, they're called borough presidents, can come to us and say, how do, we have this problem, we need to figure out how to solve it, we want to use open data, we want to be thinking about data analytics, but we don't necessarily have the capacity in government, how do we do this? And so we then get our undergraduates to solve that problem. And so this year we've been able to do 20. If you want to take a look at some of our work and see some of the tools that have come out from that program, go to beta.nyc/projects and you'll be able to see that. And now I'm going to show you this little video here that talks a little bit about our program. Oh, I should add that the video was done as a crash course with Hannah. Thank you very much. It took a week to shoot. We used an iPhone, a wide-angle lens, a Shure microphone, and a tripod, and pretty much ran around our office building in 1 Center Street in New York City to put this together. Total number of hours was 4 or 5 hours cut together, probably about 4 or 5 hours worth of time, like rewatching it and splicing it down. And then there was the magic hands of the editors here at New America to bring you this wonderful little story of our community boards and how we're using technology and data to address their technical issues. here at Beta NYC, we've created this little program called the Civic Innovation Lab and Fellows Program. It's really powered by a few full-time staff members who have been primarily funded through the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and that have essentially been given a small little runway to experiment with how do we get data, particularly city open data, into the hands of hyper-local government, as well as giving space to experiment with new digital tools, very simple, lightweight information tools for community boards to essentially operate with.
If the city wants to purchase or sell property, requests for street co-namings, ramps, or elevators within the public right-of-way, street activity permits. You want to pull up a horse for your wedding in the curb lane. There's races, bike races, marathons, what have you, 5Ks, that goes through the community board. If the city wants to change the city map, or anyone wants to change the city map.
Problem that we were experiencing in 2013, 2014 was the fact that the city was producing open data, but it was at an accessible level that was only for professionals, and I wanted to break that and make it accessible for the general public. And my primary user would be a community board member because they have the charter mandated responsibility to do oversight and effectively could wield their power of their voice and their pen to say that an agency should be producing better information or data.
Basically tap into these young smart minds from CUNY, great schools at CUNY, to start kind of digging into what this open data could reveal about the city. Because all of a sudden, with passage of the law, there was so much data being generated onto the open data portal, and not enough, kind of regular people digging into it at this point.
I have an economics background, so for some, for me, sometimes it would be like, at first, I was so surprised at what people would go, wait in line, go to this community board, and wait to speak about this thing. Very targeted thing. I'm continuously amazed at that.
And having Ramesh and Jen here, they look at the data. When they're looking at, the Beta NYC has SLAM, State Liquor Authority Mapper. They've scraped that data and they combine it 301, and they see, we use it at meetings. You can see if there's an establishment that has a ton of complaints.
We want to create an automatic process to kind of, for the bulk things like liquor license applications, where they're kind of like the same, either like it easily lends itself to be kind of automated. Because it's like, yes, no, like, yes, we'll approve this, no, we'll not. But in that, we'll start generating analytics, and then we can use that. So we're kind of like at the ground floor in that respect.
And they've helped us transition into using Google from our old email suite so that we can start building web forms and collecting data and have the data come in digitally instead of a scanned PDF or a scanned handwritten document. And so we're moving over into being able to have data come in a usable way.
At the micro level, it's not just about using data on kind of like dashboard side of things, but it's also intaking data. Many community boards have public meetings that have hundreds of people that attend. That is an excellent example of civic engagement, but then how do you follow up with those people? So we've studied some community boards that have forms that they pass out iPads to people to essentially do list building at that very moment. It's a very controversial issue if there's a rezoning that's going to have an impact. Thousands of people in a neighborhood, but there's at least 100 some odd people that show up for this community meeting. What is the simple tool that they could be using to be capturing those email addresses and then trying to follow up with those people afterward?
In a couple of years, me or my successor will thank everyone for having that, because we'll we'll have actionable data. We can actually plan for it. Right now, it's just like, well, I wonder what's coming. You know? And then that database is going to live in the CRM, and it'll have linkages to the building they're in. So if there's issue with the building, I know any residents who've reached out, who lives in that building, who lives next door to the building. I'll know which law firms, if there's a pattern with like kind of, if a certain law firm tends to have bad clients, you know, so I can talk with the law firm. Those are sorts of patterns that we just can't identify right now. It's all based on like whether or not maybe we catch it or we remember, but that's no way to run an office for the long term.
The opportunity with the project inside of Community Board 1 is really focused around a experimentation around what type of talent, new talent, can we bring to these small government operations. Community boards have a very small budget. They have late meetings that run for hours with passionate voices that are for or against and that are very opinionated and sometimes not rooted in reality. Our goal is to say there are many civic engagement processes that are being done. There's a lot of permits and licensing and listening and kind of calculating and constructing kind of a grand narrative of what happens within a small fixed geography to 150,000 people. And so what are the talents that we need to be building into the next wave of civil servants?
I'm glad that I've gotten to see this side of city government. The more thoughtful side, at least, you know, juxtaposed against the other side that's still there, and you know, there's still issues. But I would have never kind of imagining investing my time in city government at all. You know, not necessarily that I'll even be in, but even working in that kind of, you know, ecosystem, however you want to define it, within city governments and nonprofits and stuff like that. You know, it definitely changed the way I see, you know, how much rewarding work that could be done. Sometimes the kind of just beautifulness of ordinary people. You definitely get to appreciate that.
If you want stickers, I have stickers. If you also want to know a really cool icebreaker on using open data or an open data icebreaker game, come find me afterward. I've got many tricks. If you want a card game on if you want to learn how to play open data through cards, I have that game as well. So looking forward to meet as many of you. And if you're on the internet, just go to beta.nyc and it's all under our classes. So thanks for the invite.
Thank you so much. I love that shot of the skyline combined with the granularity of getting the data out to these sort of micro neighborhood organizations. It's just a great contrast. And so now we're going to hear from Sarah Sullivan, who's the Deputy Executive Director of the New Data Project and the team behind Vote With Me. Prior to starting NDP, Sarah served in the Obama White House as a senior writer to President Obama, and then as the first Chief of Staff of the United States Digital Service. And she'll be our last presentation, and then we'll have closing remarks from Emma Coleman, former editor at The Commons. So welcome, Sarah.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to tell you a story about telling the truth in government, or rather, tell you a story about telling stories about telling the truth in government. So it was 2009, and I was a student in Boston, and I was working for the Senate President of Massachusetts at the State House. At the same time, down in DC, President Obama was vigorously working to pass the Affordable Care Act when a champion of the law and his 60th vote in the United States Senate, Senator Kennedy, died. My state legislature then faced a very big political decision, which was to change a Massachusetts state law to get a replacement senator to vote on the law as soon as possible. The political incentives were very high, The governor and the House Speaker came out immediately in support of this political change, but my boss, the Senate President, was taking her time. I was an intern at the time, and I was reading her mail, and she was getting a lot of incoming mail about this issue. So I got to read it, and I had a chance to really think about it. And even though I could appreciate the political tension and realities, it became very clear to me that in this case, the political choice wasn't the right one. Sometime during this time, my dad called me on the phone to catch up. I was at a Starbucks in line one morning, and he said, "What's new?" And I said, "Oh, you know, my boss is going to make a political decision that everyone else is making, but she really shouldn't do it because it's not right, and I think it could backfire." I definitely wasn't asking for advice, and I didn't even really know I was telling him this when he said, "So you going to tell her?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, no, definitely not." And he was like, "Well, why not?" And I was like, "Well, I'm an intern, and like, I don't know, maybe I'd get fired or something." And he said, "Okay, how much money do you make?" And I said, "Really not very much." Sometimes parents will sit you on their lap, and stroke your back and tell you it's okay. And sometimes parents stand you up to see what you're made of. My dad stood me up and he said, "If you won't have courage when you have nothing to lose, when will you ever?" That conversation and that Starbucks line that morning became one of those formative moments in my life. And it wasn't because I told the Senate President my truth or my recommendation on what she should do. It was because I didn't. I didn't do that. I didn't tell her. I didn't even really try. And I got to watch the politics unfold in a really wild way that actually wasn't good. And I'll never get to know if I could have influenced it because I didn't try. And I got that taste of cowardice, that taste of failing at courage that has stuck with me. So now it's 2015, and I'm working at the United States Digital Service, which is President Obama's technology team that came after healthcare.gov sent to work on his most important technology problems. And it's late 2015, it's the heat of the migrant crisis, the heat of the 2016 primary cycle. Refugee admissions is a huge national issue. It's the last year the president is overseeing admissions on this program, and the administration really doesn't want to get anything wrong. So they send in USDS just to check it out. And they want to see if the government is on track to hit the president's target of admitting 85,000 refugees into the country by the end of the year. So we put a USDS team together that I was on to go and find out. And we started conducting interviews up and down and sideways throughout the whole program. You may know that admitting refugees into the US is among the most labor-intensive services of the federal government. It takes many years to review one application, and a single application can touch as many as 10 federal agencies in the process, so it's this huge, huge thing. Make no mistake, after just 6 weeks of looking at this program, we did not know more about this program than the hundreds of federal employees that work on it. Some employees spend their lives mastering a single step in this process. We obviously didn't know more than them, but what we were given was a vantage point that others weren't given. We were specifically asked to look at the program from end to end, and we were asked to go up and down and sideways to find out if the government was going to reach the goal. So the up and down part, we could meet with the subcontractor in a basement somewhere, because they are always in a basement, and we can go way up to the cabinet secretaries and the White House chief of staff, and sometimes even the president, and sideways we could go between agencies to the Department of State and the Department of Homeland Security and the different intelligence community groups. After a few weeks, we start to put together a picture that is not particularly savory, and that we're very much behind track toward the overall number. And we started to put together the bad news that we probably weren't going to hit it without some important changes. Luckily, we had the opportunity to tell the truth in a very relaxed, very casual setting known as the White House Situation Room. Super chill. And USDS was there, so were people much, much more senior than us. And like we all do, we waited for someone else to tell the truth. We waited for someone to maybe just imply or even ask the question of, were we on track? and then we could chime in. But of course it doesn't work like that. Somehow telling the truth never works like that. And when you are the only one in the room who seems to have the only perspective that you have on the truth, we can give ourselves a million reasons to not jump off the cliff. We are not the smartest, we are not the most experienced. There are more senior people in this room, people who've worked longer on this program than us. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe those 6 weeks we got an answer that was wrong. There's a million ways to not tell the truth, but that's not what we did. And we told the truth in that room, which that was a truth bomb that escalated, and then obviously we got to tell it to another very just super low-key stakeholder known as the White House Chief of Staff, and who was very surprised to learn this news, which is fun. Ultimately, telling the truth those days created the space to actually address the problem. And it allowed decision makers to see what was really happening, decide to reallocate resources, decide to make some changes, and it allowed us, the technology team, to make a few technology changes. I tell you these two stories back to back because we often talk about these heroic, epic tales of bravery in government where we stood up in the scariest room possible and spoke the truth when lives were on the line and it mattered, and how we'll do that when it's our turn. But I really think that we won't do that. Not if we haven't been practicing it. Not if we haven't had the opportunity to fail at courage, to taste the bitter taste of cowardice, to know what it feels like to not want to do that again. And I actually don't think that telling the truth gets easier. I think you just get more practice. And USCS is a technology organization, and there are major technology problems in government. But I personally actually think of the US Digital Service as more of a truth-telling organization than a technology one. And if what we really had to scale was a team's ability to tell the truth in government, then what we had to do is give them a chance to practice telling the truth. We had to value telling the truth and reinforce telling the truth. I'm sure there's lots of ways to build that in a culture, but a way that we did that was by telling stories. We told stories about telling the truth. It was crazy. As the staff grew to 200, we had a staff meeting room that still only fit 40 people. And each week, everybody would pile in and sit shoulder to shoulder and on the floor. And it got really, really hot, and people would get really sweaty. And it didn't make any sense. I was like, why do people just stop coming to the meeting? Like, there's no room. But they didn't. They kept coming. And I mean, partly they were supposed to. But I think partly it was that people liked the stories. People wanted to hear the stories of truth-telling in government, and we used that space to do it. I remember when Dave Kaufman, who joined the communications team, came on at USDS, and his first assignment was to codify the USDS values. And he was interviewing all these people to get their 2 cents throughout the organization, and I was like, look, Dave, you can skip my interview, like, I'll save your time, like, I know you have a lot of them, so long as one of the values is literally tell the truth. And he was like, cool, yeah, like, I'm gonna workshop that, like, that's great. And I was like, no, it has to literally be tell the truth. And he's like, right, I got you, I'm playing with it. And I was like, sit down, we're doing the interview. And I began telling him stories about telling the truth, stories like the refugee program, stories about how we needed to train people to tell the truth in scary rooms. And he stopped me mid one of them and was like, oh my God, I think one of the values has to be tell the truth. I was like, okay, there we go. We created this like slightly cultish, definitely special ceremony, coin ceremony for new members coin ceremony for new members. And this membership ceremony was rooted in these values and rooted in telling stories about the values. And because there's no quicker way to tell stories, there's no shortcut to telling stories, I found. Eventually, when I was chief of staff, every 2 weeks with new members, I sat down and for 4 hours straight, we just told stories. We told stories about telling truth and how to do the hard thing in government. So in that refugee story, sometime after the dust settled, we got a call from White House Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, telling us that the president was having a bad day and that he thought we could cheer him up. which if you're getting the picture of this team, the idea that we would be the ones to cheer anybody up is hilarious. But anyway, I also don't know what it takes for a president to have a bad day, and we definitely were not going to ask. But Mikey Dickerson, who's here, our administrator at the time, showed up to the Oval Office later that day, along with Eric Heisen and Raf Majma, who were USDS leaders who were leading the teams most responsible for the refugee work. So they show up to the Oval Office and do their best to pick up the president by telling him their tales about how they had helped the refugee program and how another USDSer, Stephanie Grosser, had worked tirelessly to make it so that DHS officers could digitally sign a form rather than hand signing it, which may sound simple enough, but there were DHS officers flying around the world just to be in the same location as their paperwork to sign it. And amending that saved them from having to travel and shaved weeks off of the whole process. So they're telling this story to the president, and he apparently is, very grateful that we helped make the goal, and very grateful that, that we had helped get there and whatnot. But he was like, so appreciate it. But you're telling me that my government didn't know that you can digitally sign a form before you guys showed up? And they were kind of like, I don't know what to tell you, but this was our innovation. But I think in that moment he was seeing some of what we saw, which is that the technology was not always the hardest part. The hardest part that we found was being able to find the truth, was being able to tell the truth, and then having the courage to actually do it when the moment came. We taught our staff to have courage by telling stories. So what stories are you going to tell? Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Emma Coleman, and I used to be the managing editor for The Commons, and now I'm writing about state and local news over at a publication called Route 50, which you heard a little bit about from Kate. When I first started working on the planning meetings that would eventually become The Commons, I kept hearing a word that I didn't recognize. So I asked Viv Graubard, our Public Interest Technology Director of Strategy, what it meant. And she proceeded to explain to me what procurement is and why it is very, very important in the government space. So important, in fact, that it became the theme of our second issue of The Commons, and I heard about it in so many interviews that I began to laugh along at the extremely niche procurement humor doled out by government practitioners. But what stuck with me from that conversation was Viv's reaction to my asking about it. She said, of course, if you haven't worked in government, you wouldn't know what this is. And that turned out to be a common theme in my year writing about local government innovation for The Commons. So much of what government does isn't immediately clear when you're looking in from the outside. But as everyone who spoke here today can attest to, it's vitally important that stories about government start to clear that window a bit, to make it easier to see how government works at all levels, and to shine a light particularly on the innovation that harbors there. I learned a lot about local government in my time working on The Commons. I learned that often people were so busy doing the work of innovation that you have to schedule interviews to talk about that work weeks in advance. But I also learned that once you get them on the phone, those same people will eagerly share with you all their successes, failures, methodologies, concerns, and ideas for other places to engage with the same solutions. I learned that scheduling an hour to chat often wasn't enough. I had come from Silicon Valley before this, and I saw the language of startups was present in government too. People talked to me about human-centered design and user testing, but they manipulated that terminology to solve complex and varied local problems. They were deploying the same tactics under much stricter constraints, and often it was working. In my last interview for The Commons, I spoke with Justin Cutler, the new Director of Recreation Services for Seattle, about his time in a previous job as the recreation coordinator for a small city in Colorado. He told me that in government, you have to learn to adapt and to find a way to use those constraints to your advantage. You have to be creative, he said, because we can only change what we have control over. Innovation is a choice. As a full-time journalist now, I've learned to see storytelling about government in the same way. There are obvious constraints. The terms you use might be unfamiliar to people outside government, and the alphabet soup of acronyms most certainly is. There are only 800 words or a few minutes of audio or video to explain a project that may have taken 5 years just to plan. There are certain challenges that must be embraced to write about government in an engaging and accessible way. I found that the creativity of storytelling has to match the creativity of the work. But I think storytelling diverges from innovation in one key way. Innovation is a choice, but storytelling is a necessity. It makes those doing the work feel seen and connected to a greater community. It shows people that there is more to government than the gridlock in Washington, and in that way we have a much nicer job than other writers because we get to tell good stories about government. It also propels ideas worth spreading into new places where they can take root and sprout new forms. Storytelling has the potential to make change bigger than just one community or one government office. And to me, that feels like work worth doing. I'm so grateful to be a part of a community that feels the same way, and I want to thank Cecilia Munoz and the entire Public Interest Technology team for championing that work and helping forge this community. Finally, I want to thank all of you for coming and to encourage you to continue building that community right now at the reception. Thank you.